A very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the program Galaxy Prime. It's such a pleasure to be in your company on this Monday. Here's hoping you had a fantastic weekend. We're coming to you live from our Midrand studios here in Johannesburg. And if you're also watching us on our Facebook page, it is live as we speak. And we're also on channel 500 on StarSat. Now, it's just gone past 6 p.m. Central African time, and as advertised, we have a special program for you today. Now, the mission of the South African Association of Public Administration and Management is to encourage and to promote good governance and effective service delivery through the advancement of professionalism, scholarship, and the practice in public administration and management. The government departments, universities, and other entities are affiliated with SAPAM. SAPAM holds a series of discussions on topical issues. Now, today's panel's discussion engages on a very important issue, one that affects public service. And I've got a very distinguished panel in studio with me today that will be helping us to dissect and ventilate these issues that we've seen taking part in public discourse. We have Kgabo Morifi, is a South African Association of Public Administration and management from that department. We've got Dr. Pali Lehohla, the former South African statistician, and we've got Ms. Magdalene Moonsamy. She's an admitted attorney and a deputy chairperson of the South African Peer Review Mechanism. You're at home. Welcome to join in the conversation. Our social media platforms are there for you to utilize. Our Twitter handle at GUN_TV_, and you can also join us on our Facebook page live, as I've mentioned before. Lady and gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having us.
Now, let's just, I suppose, an overview. I've been going through some of your opinion pieces, Dr. Lehohla, that are very opinionated, I must say, with regards to corporate governance in the public and private sector. To kind of set the tone of the conversation that we're going to have today, the procurement of PPEs having cast a very dark shadow on South Africa's mounting problems. And you're saying it's a bit hypocritical for us to be shocked by what is happening with regards to the corruption that we're seeing happening. Would you like to expand on that a bit?
Yes, I think it's sheer hypocrisy. This would have had to be expected. And these vultures have been hovering around this for a very long time. If you think about what happened around in Nkandla and what happened in Parliament, protecting a fireproof, people saying that will come with buckets. That was the highest scandalous thing that could happen in a country. And the Chief Justice labeled it so. So what's surprising now?
So you're saying that set the tone for everything else that is happening right now?
That is happening now. And because there haven't been any consequences since, we are yet to see a lot more. So this is hypocrisy to come and cry. It's crocodile tears, really.
Magdalene, the code of ethics, we see a lot of companies in the private and public sector seem to use that as a premise of how they want to run their businesses. They don't always abide by that. And sometimes we see that some of these ethics are to protect individuals and not necessarily that of the institution. What have you read from what has been playing out in the public arena in the past few days, particularly during this COVID-19 period and the procurement of PPEs?
Thank you so much. I think the first thing that we must accept is that we need these allegations to be resolved. There are institutions from the report of the African Peer Review Mechanism, 2009-2010, which clearly indicates that there are anti-corruption units, there are special investigation units, there is the Interministerial Committee, there is an integrated finance management system. Ours is to ask ourselves, even if we want to step into the terrain of ethics, why are we creating structures that are not performing or not allowing ourselves as citizens to participate actively on the issues of good governance, on democratic participation, on issues of socio-economic matters, corporate governance, as well as issues of economic matters, now economic management for that matter. And my concern is that the issue of ethics is one that can be signed, codes of conduct. However, who then yields the whip? And if those structures are in place to whip whatever needs to be done in order, then it would be speaking about the fact that there is compliance with ethics. But my major question is the issue of good governance. Let's take it one step further. To what extent are the skills of our civil society expertise being used to a maximum effect to aid and support what is currently happening in terms of allegations of corruption that are, I think, more are spreading more viciously than the COVID-19 pandemic. So for me, I believe strongly that we need to take the issue of ethics and good governance, democratic participation. So we need to get our citizens involved in holding officials accountable.
Right, because then if we don't, then we're also complicit as citizens if we're not holding them accountable. Yeah.
Because the issue is that when you ask somebody, Ubatuphile, that's on the wall of every government department, that is expected for a public servant to comply with the principle of Ubatuphile. And yet it's just there as a decoration. At the same time, how do we build from this experience, from the experience Ntate Pali is talking about, a stronger democracy, a stronger influence, and a positive participation of our people and civil society?
Right.
So for me, I think the issue of ethics is something that must be micromanaged by our people.
You bring a very interesting perspective to it, Kgabo. I don't know if you agree with that, that it's easier for us citizens to point fingers, you know, to the executive, to leaders, to say you've done this and that. But what are we doing? What we've got agency as citizens, and how are we using that power to make sure that we hold those people to account? As Sapam, what has been your assessment of the situation?
I think Magdalene is quite correct. We need to embed ethics within society. Because one of the challenges that we have is that, you know, the post-apartheid South Africa came about with, deification of private wealth, which to a great extent, members, ordinary citizens, they tend to embrace those that are beneficiaries of corruption in our society. They come with your expensive designer labeled clothes, bling bling, the ostentatiousness of our leaders and public officials, those that are, are meant to, service our people. And our people on the ground are the ones that are, embracing some of those. And as this discussion started around a PPE corruption, many people were saying, no, the people who are complaining about these things are those that are not part of the eating, of the looting.
They also want to be part of the eating.
So they are not necessarily, they are complaining not because they want, the good to be done. They are, pushing for the public interest, or rather your utilitarian value system. No, they are saying, not necessarily saying, no, look, can we also be included? So now it tells you about the psyche of the society that we live in, that we've got to do something about this matter, that we, in order for us to begin to deal with these things. I think you talk about the code of ethics. Our constitution is laid, presents, it lays bare, values and principles that should guide public administration in section 195 of our constitution. One of it is to promote the high standards of professional ethics. Now, if you have even institutions of ethics that are troubled, it's a matter of concern in the country. So it is something that we've got to really look into. But one other fundamental challenge I want to bring to the table is that what is called institutional fundamentalism. So instead of Magdalene talks quite correctly, there are institutions of the state that have been put in place to deal with corruption. They are not dealing with corruption, and instead every time there are cases of corruption, there is a committee that is put in place, an institution that is created to deal with it. And in the long run, you have a proliferation of state institutions that do not do anything.
Right.
Now, instead of doing the work, if you were to ask me, the president asked ministers to assist us curb corruption. They are not trained.
They're not trained to do that, and they could be complicit.
There are institutions that are supposed to do so. I'm trying to you know, just show you the point I'm trying to make, that instead of having institutions of the state doing what they have been established to do, they don't do it. We're in the mode of planning. We're always thinking, but when are we going to have a government or state institutions that do what they've been established to do?
So we're always planning and probing and inquiring. That is, it's a constant state that we find ourselves in. Here's the thing with elected officials who say, look, I will not be falling on my sword until I've been found guilty by a court of law. How do you then compare that with a leader who's supposed to observe a code of ethics, the morals, the virtues that come with trying to abide by that, Dr. Lehohla?
Well, I mean, just look at how much time the ANC spent, the NEC, defining corruption, when there's been looting, massive looting of PPEs. A third of the time there, if not 50%, was in defining corruption. And the kettles were calling pots black. And obviously, we deserve the leaders we have. That's the bottom line. And you are correct in saying, well, we aspire for this ostentatious behaviors and crass materialism as society. So we've elected these people, that's what we deserve. And how do you expect them to behave? They can't behave otherwise. That's why they spend all that time trying to define corruption. They have not subjected themselves to public office. That public office commands and demands of a higher standard of transparency and communicating that transparency transparently. That's what you need. I mean, what Basiat explains it very nicely, that over a period of time, a group of men create laws and institutions that support corruption, and the moral code that glorifies it. And that moral code that glorifies it is what happened at the meeting of the NEC, where they had to define corruption. That's the glorification of this thing.
So perhaps we should start by trying to define what leadership is, and try to generate our conversation from there and marry it with the issue of ethics and see how that complements each other, Magdalene.
I want to agree with you.
But not quite.
Because I think that even yourself, you're struggling with the issue of ethics, because ethics is an abstract, personal obligation, as opposed to what we speak about when we speak about malfeasance. Because there's accountability, civil and criminal,
yes,
in terms of a wrongdoing.
Yes, that's why I said, you know, a person will tell you, look, I haven't been convicted by a court of law, I haven't been found guilty, so I might have been implicated in this, but you expect me to withdraw, to resign, but I'm not going to do that until a court of law actually finds me guilty. So that's what I'm trying to balance out here.
Okay, I don't want to get into the debate about overinflated egos and arrogance, because that is exactly where that position leaves us. That let me go to a court of law, okay, to prove my innocence or guilt. But what I want to say is the following. In the APRM, there's a self-assessment tool for governance and democratic participation. One of the things that need to be included is the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, including the level of confidence in the state and its mechanisms. Let us leave it to society through the surveys and the questionnaires, etc., to tell us themselves, for us to find a proper solution and not to pre-adjudicate, and to allow those who are also in a predicament of allegations to pre-adjudicate themselves in the space of suggesting, prove it. Because for me, I take exception to that kind of, even as an attorney. One has to first defend their client and prove it. But here we have a trace of revelations that are going on. And let's allow our society, let's allow civil society, citizens, to take ownership of this process, because it is clear. And when Ntate Pali says that we must define corruption, that means that there is a level of spinning that we are doing to avoid the reality. So we are spinning corruption to make it seem as if, no, it's not that.
You're trying to reinvent it, so it's not what it is.
So let's not spin it. Let's be realistic about the fact that if there is wrongdoing, and if that wrongdoing has been identified, no resignation, suspension is going to recorrect that wrongdoing. Because there are wrongdoings that have compromised the national statistic on infections, the lives of our people, which can then be a crime against humanity. So we are sitting here with the blood of our people on our hands because of allegations that we must wait to be investigated. And in that period of investigation, we can go through a second wave. My prospect is to let us be honest to the process that the African Union has tasked the APRM to do, and the APRM at a national level, to say, let's go back to our people. Let our people be the decider of the faith, of the strength, the confidence, of the mechanisms that have been put in place, monies that have been spent, millions that have been spent. Let them then be the decider of what is the outcome through our engagements on good governance, whether the state has really, and you are going to find, like you had in the Kenyan project after an election, where the people spoke on a base report. Kenyan government said, well, we don't agree because we don't want our people to disagree with the way they perceive this election to be.
Right.
But it is time for democracy to exercise itself, not at the level of the state, because the people are the cornerstone of democracy. And our people must take their democracy back.
Yes, even the preamble of the Constitution says that.
Absolutely. So when Ntate Pali says, but we cannot apologize for leaders that we put there, or Kgabo says so, we must be able to say, let our people speak. Let civil society speak. Let our people go back and through a vote or through a questionnaire, declare what they must say. And that is when we will have our understanding of how really it has gone down to the grassroots. Because at a high level, we can argue it. From a mechanism point of view, we can provide many solutions. Say, shut this down, shut that down, don't come with ethics. Let's just move with this process. But from the point of the people, there's nothing much we can do unless our people decide to stand up and say enough is enough.
But do people realize the agency that they have? Do we as people realize that agency?
Look, I think with the lockdown, I mean, firstly we must agree that corruption predates, this COVID-19.
Oh, absolutely,
pandemic.
yes.
And that what the pandemic has helped us to do was to reveal the extent of the rot within our state institution. And that we must agree that this is a reflection of what has always been transpiring. I mean, this you have a people who have been, hungry for resources to be channeled to their cronies. Now, it's a challenge that we've got to say that at least the pandemic, in the 6 months or the 4 months that we've had, this has been laid bare. This is what happens with almost every other deal that takes place. I mean, but the other important issue I wanted to raise was that, which I think is absent in the public space, is that we tend to focus more on government corruption more than private sector corruption. And Black Business was raising this matter, that when you look at the Solidarity Fund and the manner in which the funds have been spent, they have been given to cronies as well. And a chunk of what we talk about government corruption, which I think also we've got to reflect about it. So what you see in the public sector is a microcosm of what is really transpiring in the private sector. So you can't sit down and say then the challenge of corruption must be dealt with and we focus solely on government. I think we've got to transcend that notion and go to say, how do we also deal with the private sector corruption, and to a great extent that which, because both private and public sector are corrupt, and this is what society, some sections of society embraces. I mean, when the lockdown regulations, some of us who stays in the townships, I could hear some of our friends saying, hey, we can't go to funerals anymore because we want to go there and showcase our fashion, our style, and stuff like that. These are, to a great extent, proceeds of corruption that we want to, embrace and compete amongst each other in our society. So now, Magdalene, as we go to civil society to engage, we have a challenge that there's a particular section of civil society that embraces corruption, and they don't see it as a wrong thing. The people who think if I have power, why is it wrong for me to empower my friends and my relatives? If anyone charity begins at home, they'll tell you that. So it's a particular issue we've got to go back. I think one of the challenges of our post-apartheid South Africa is that we've neglected the role of educating society, civic education, wherein we embed some of these values that we shared in the liberation struggle to shade amongst our people, so that our people can see that it is wrong to spend government money on things, or even to inflate prices. If I buy something for 5 rand, I should see it as something wrong to charge government 5 rand more than what I got. I think it is the consciousness that we've lost in the process as society and even leaders. I want to challenge even the ruling party that if you have a ruling party that can lose a chunk of their intellectual property through a website that carried most of the seminal work that the organization has taken, what more do you expect? To have people who can defend the Constitution if they can't even defend intellectual property of its own movement? It's a challenge. So we have entered into an era where we have lost consciousness. So now when consciousness leaves you, it does not say, hey, bye-bye. So
and I think if anything that the Zondo Commission has shown us is exactly what you're saying, Kgabo, that the public sector is not in cahoots on its own. When they do corruption, the private sector is involved with that. There was SASSA, we've heard stories about that as well. And talking about the civic organization, Magdalene, I think there seems to be a bias here, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, to say when they want to amplify issues of corruption, they seem to only want to speak about the public sector of it, and not so much about the private sector.
Look, I am absolutely in agreement with you. I won't agree with you on the bias because it depends on who has the mic at that moment.
You have the mic right now.
If it is an AfriForum is obviously going to want to slam the public sector. So we just need to accept that fact, and that is correct. There's one thing that I raise fervently, and that is now I see that people are starting to talk about predated colonialism and how corruption, and my point is, let's deal with what we are dealing with now. We know that there is an individual at the age of 36, if I'm not mistaken, who has done business selling masks to the UK in hundreds of millions of rands, and that person has not been brought to book, because the levels of protectionism that we've exposed ourselves to, or that we've not been able to protect ourselves against, is one on media bias. We need to be honest and understand. And platforms like this, which grant us the opportunity to speak and speak freely, are extremely necessary. One. Secondly, we have the bias of what are the failures of a democratic state. Thirdly, we must be able to express our opinion without fear or favor. I was beginning to wonder at some point if Kgabo was hiding his view because he's from public administration. And then the next thing he's going to be called in a corner and be worked. But the reality is, we need to hold the hands of each other against systemic corruption. Have we learnt this corruption from a system that existed prior to us? Did we inherit it through the genes of apartheid? Because apartheid gave us a DNA that we do not want to talk about. A DNA that, whether we are white or black, it left us with emotional, psychological damage that caused us to retaliate in possibly the same response, but with a more harmonizing effect. And my concern is that, yes, going back to the question, civil society has to take a conscious decision to say private, public sector, even in civil society, through the self-assessment governance tool, there has to be consensus building. And that consensus building is where the consciousness comes in. We have really true veterans, stalwarts, minds who understand what the project moving into democracy should have been. Today we are a laughing stock. On the continent, people are asking, how do you guys reach these numbers of infections?
And I want to come to Dr. Lehohla.
Oh, sorry, let me just finish. I made a mistake. Sorry, Tati. I forgot for a second that we are sitting with the statistics.
Yes. No, the authority.
I am saying that those issues are issues that we need to be on the pulse. And we can only be on the pulse of that if we are able to hold each other accountable, even myself and us sitting here and say, Chief, that thing that you're speaking about that we must all eat is out of order. Because as civil society, yes, civil society funding has been moved out. So how do you move the arm? It means you've literally crippled the arm that must be able to do what it needs to do, go back to the people and say, where are the landmines that we are facing? And this self-assessment governance tool, these questionnaires that must come out, we need to bring the COVID-19 issue into it, which is part of it, to say, how has this ultimately, apart from good governance, democratic participation, socio-economic issues, issues of economic management and cooperative governance, how has the COVID-19 pandemic further deteriorated the baseline report? And what then are the implications? Where are we? And that is where we will hear the voice of our people very clearly. And civil society must clean itself. The private sector has way too much to account for. And if our people can shift their attention, not entirely from the state, but to private sector, then we will see the effect that we want. Because we need money from business to be able to, Kgabo spoke about the COVID relief fund. We knew how that prejudiced so many of us. An example that we must expose here, because we are given an opportunity. The Legal Practice Council,
Freely so.
The Black Lawyers Association writes to the Legal Practice Council and says, can you assist us with COVID relief? No. We receive a communication almost 4 months later. 5,000 Rand is what you'll get. What does a legal practitioner do with 5,000 Rand to survive? Now this is an untransformed
industry.
An untransformed private sector. Because those who are sitting at the micro or the informal sector of the economy or the middle sector of the economy, not even a middle class, I will not even regard what we have as a middle class, an informal sector of the economy, are highly prejudiced, are highly isolated. We need to hold those who are really understanding and controlling this economy to their favor.
Account. And I'm going to ask you to hold on to that thought as we take a very short break as we continue to discuss this issue of ethical leadership. When we come back, I want to hear from Dr. Lehohla with regards to the statistics of COVID-19 infections. Have they been manipulated? And if so, what is the motive behind that? Do stay with us.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge, and that's where MB Kgabo Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4187 or send us an email on admin@chabangu.co.za. MB Kgabo Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
Feel the heat.
I love Adam Selman.
The girls are really thin. I think it looks very glamorous from the outside.
The life of a model in New York City.
There is such cool prints. So many.
You know, I'm buying this.
Look at me and all the selfie sort of thing. Honestly, I didn't really know that was actually a job. It just didn't occur to me.
Congratulations. Feel the excitement. Feel the heat with StarSat.
Welcome back to the program Galaxy Prime in association with the South African Association of Public Administration and Management. My name is Audrich Mandatwala. We have a very distinguished panel in studio today discussing the issue of ethical leadership. Now, the mission of the South African Association of Public Administration and Management is to encourage and to promote good governance and the effective service delivery through the advancement of professionalism and scholarship and practice in public administration as well as management. Government departments, universities and other entities are affiliated with SAPAM. They hold a series of discussions on topical issues such as this one. Today's panel's discussion engages on a very important issue, one that affects the public service. Now, as we continue our conversation, I was going to come to you, Dr. Lehohla. I want to quote one of your opinion pieces. I really enjoy reading them. They're always they're really illuminating. You say nothing draws attention to politicians as numbers and their distribution across space. These numbers are political currency. Now, you've also alluded to the fact that the COVID-19 infection numbers, the cases, have not been very accurate. I want to believe there's a reason why that has been so. Would you like to explain that?
Well, how many hours do you have?
Well, let's try to constrict it in a minute or two.
Yes, I mean, the numbers are accurate in as far as those who have been tested. That is, you test a person and you say, this is the number. From then on, they can't be accurate. Secondly, they can't be representative because you test those who report to you, and there are serious biases in there. If you wanted them to be representative, you would have to have a large sample, which is random, and you test people randomly, and then each time you estimate for the population how many people will be infected. Then you'll have a representative image of what is happening in South Africa. Of course, that costs a bit of money, but I'm sure it would have been better use of money rather than buying PPEs. Money which has been stolen through PPEs. You needed both those strategies to get the extent of the pandemic as well as its evolution and progression. The numbers that we've got are not the extent of the infection. The extent of the infection would be raised to the population. So we should be having about maybe 5 million, 10 million people infected. We're only seeing 530,000 because those are the ones that have been tested.
Perhaps let me rephrase my question. I think I was trying to say, do you think there's a deliberate move, a deliberate motive by those that are responsible for collating these numbers to not give us a correct picture of what is happening out there with regards to the COVID-19 infections?
It could be possible if there are political consequences when people say this and that, and if this thing is not run by an independent body such as Statistics South Africa, which has by law protection to pronounce on numbers. There can be concerns around the authenticity of the numbers. I mean, just like justice, that must be not only be done, but must be seen to be done. Statistics must be seen to be fair. And once they are in the context of an interested party, such as a politician, no doubt they cast doubt. That's the problem. That is why you have this institution called Stats SA, which is non-partisan, non-policy affiliated. The only policy that they have is the correctness of methods. And unfortunately, the correctness of methods doesn't exist in this pandemic. In the first instance, you are having to record things that, for those that come. I mean, let me just try and be more dramatic in this, that Molana lost his coin. And his friend sees him looking somewhere and asks Molana, "Molana, what are you doing?" He says, I lost my coin. Then the friend says, "Where did you lose it?" He says, "I don't know where I lost it. If I knew, I would have picked it there." Then he says, "Why are you looking for it there?" Then Molana says, "This is where there's light." So if people come for testing, those are the only ones, that's where the light is, but you don't know where the coin is lost. And that's the problem that we have with COVID-19. So it's a big problem. Then, of course, recoveries is another nightmare, because you don't go back to test to be confirmed to have recovered. So I do not know, and I don't understand those numbers around recoveries. But that's where we are now. Yes. Coming to what Magdalene has been saying around citizen service, and I think she's making a very important point. Because, you know, KwaZulu-Natal wanted citizen service, right from Matlingwane, the Minister of Public Service. And they said to us as Stats, they say, we need this annually. In fact, we want them at ward level. Of course, we didn't have enough money to do this. That was a very bold move. And what we came out with was that people said, yes, we get these houses, we get all those water and so on. But what was interesting was people were still not happy. They could express themselves easily that we are not happy. And that's what society should have. And then we said, Magdalene, we can't run this survey because you need to have a national picture, all provinces, because otherwise, by myself as statistician general running this survey, I'm creating asymmetries in information, therefore asymmetries in democracy. But he said, you'll do it. He said, well, if you don't want, I'll do it myself. And I said, well, he's going to mess it up. So I had to do it. I went to all other provinces and said, look, you need to run this survey, citizen satisfaction surveys. All other provinces, it was too close to election time. So government couldn't allocate money to run citizen satisfaction survey. KwaZulu-Natal still runs that, and you will look, if you look at the quality and consistency in decision making, it's not tops, but it's much better than any other province, because they've consistently run those citizen satisfaction surveys. If you look Operation Skumasake, it starts with Sbundebel, it comes to Zweli Mkhize, it comes to Matlingwane, and then the other Matlingwane, and Sihle Sigala. When we ask citizens about Operation Skumasake, in KwaZulu-Natal, a lot of people understand that. In the Free State, nobody knows about that, and all these other things that come and go. So consistency of being in touch with society with these questionnaires can improve the quality of democracy and how you hold people to account. One of the things that comes out of this very, very clearly is the question of how people see service delivered and how satisfied they are. In my home, I'm satisfied with my house. Of course, ESCOM now keeps on. But I'm satisfied with the electricity, with the house, with the water, with everything there. It's a home. You go to KwaZulu-Natal and all these other places, 20% satisfaction with water, 60% satisfaction with electricity, 40% with housing. You don't have that kind of dispersion in terms of quality of services. What does it reflect? It shows that there's no planning around that entity to make it a home. The one department says, I'll put water there. The other one says, I'll put that in there. And then that feeds into the corruption, the frenzy. Because those who are in a rush to eat puts toilets there before they even put houses. And there's no school, there's not this. So when you look at all these things and how society then responds in KwaZulu-Natal, they tell you how dysfunctional the system is. And the society does tell you that. And then they can mobilize themselves and create the basis for this covenant. The state has not allocated any resources for citizen satisfaction survey. Only in KwaZulu-Natal it has been consistently run. And I'm sure over time, the quality of democracy in KwaZulu-Natal will show.
Because of that.
Because of that. And they want it at ward level. And all of them have actually consistently run with that, irrespective of how the Matkingwane changed from the other Matkingwane. But that consistency of policy, in as far as this is concerned, is a clear example of how citizens, together with government, one of the things that was very interesting in the data, I mean, you should have seen Matkingwane when we presented the results, because he was quite keen to see. They said, oh my God. When we presented this, he said, how come? He had a deep reflection on these numbers before we could go and meet his cabinet. And they deliberated on this. And then the media came in. And after deliberating and having a hard look at these numbers, it was clear that ANC was not going to get any good results in KwaZulu-Natal. It was clear from the results. You could see it.
Yeah, the point I wanted to raise, Ndade Pali raises a very important issue wherein planning, especially even policy formulation, has to be guided by science. Because what you have is that there's a deliberate stance to chastise science, to try and bring about populism instead of really reflecting on what should then, inform planning. I think that Lehohla raises a very important issue that must be emphasized, that we've got to move away from a thinking that we would just be populist about some of the things, rather be guided by, a science and proper planning. Because if you were to do all these surveys, you would understand where you are lacking, and that would also inform your planning in ensuring that you deal with pertinent issues that are challenging the people. I just wanted to emphasize that point, because I believe there was a culture in the ruling government, the governing party, especially few years ago, where intellectuals were chastised. Those that things, opinion makers called clever blacks and stuff like that. We've had to move away from that. But that the governing party has not been disinfected from all these things. As a young person, looking even at the National Youth Development Agency, that the processes have now been are towards their finality, putting people into the board. It's a reflection of some of the challenges that the governing party still has, wherein you don't look at science, you chastise intellectuals, you don't give them an opportunity to come. There's no diversity, and some of the issues that we have seen with that process. So I just wanted to make that input, and I think we've got to really internalize some of this, and for the governing party and all political parties also in the country, those that are interested with power, to really think deeply about some of these things, so that planning is, a reflection of what the people on the ground really aspire to have.
But he also said a very interesting point that stuck with me, that to say there perhaps some people that benefit from the dysfunction of the system, of not being able to collate these figures and hear from the people on the ground what is satisfying them, what they're happy about and what they're not happy about. And that is feeding into the pervasive nature of the greed of corruption. Magdalene.
So I want to take the science and respond to the science. You see, Ndale Pade is stuck with political science. Because he can take the science, but then it becomes political science. And when we speak about planning and all of those, we've got everything there. The reality is, we do not want to be. We do not want to allow ourselves to be led by institutions, by thinkers, by those who have the intellectual property to guide us towards saying, in KZN, the people are responding. You are going to see a different democracy emerging in KZN because there is a reciprocity from what the people are asking and from what the leadership is delivering. Why can you not do that in other provinces? And this is why my call for a citizenry-driven process. Our people cannot be lethargic to the reality of complaining. They need to respond. Our people must be called to action, to respond. Not when we see protests, it's because this one must be given a tender of this thing and then that one is using that faction or whatever. These are allegations. But the reality is a consolidated citizenry-driven process will be able to provide us an independent thinking. People being able to not sit and diagnose what is the definition of corruption in order to try and escape processes.
Tell us what it is so we know to escape from that definition.
We know what it is. We know what it is. We are aware. And yes, there are allegations, but do not try and diffuse. Botswana. Now I'm naming names.
Drop names.
Yeah, Botswana. There was a point, Pali, you will tell me if I'm wrong. Thinkers, media, intellectuals were saying, we are suppressed. We are not allowed to write. We are not allowed to express our views. If you are going to give our citizens mediocre assignments like define corruption, when there are allegations on every other corner, social media, even whoever is living wherever they are, they've got access to it. COVID has given us an opportunity. I get emotional, sorry. To just sit at home and to read things the whole day. We even reach a point when we see, let me come back to infections in 2 weeks because my heart is starting to get weak.
The blood pressure is getting too high. So I want us to quickly wrap up this conversation as we're running out of time. I beg your pardon for cutting you off. Yes, as you're closing off, I know you've said, what citizens need to do with regards to making sure that we hold our leadership to accountability. I also want us to talk about what the leaders need to do themselves, if we can apply our minds around that as we close this conversation.
I want to close on the
and
issue
what they need to do now, today, because these are cases that we've seen that have been investigated, the evidence is there. What do they need to do today and now to show that they are holding each other to account? Because they're the ones that are doing it, it's not the citizens.
Look, as I said initially, there are structures that have been in place. Those structures must give us their investigations, and the leadership must do what they need to do. Not necessarily the leadership, but whoever is accountable. Give power back to the institutions. I mean, Ntate Pali speaks about the fact that the Office of the Statistician General is an independent institution. Allow them to do their work and implement it. Don't just receive reports and sit on it, because you've wasted the money of the people. But also we need to flag the issue of women, because I feel really guilty sitting in a platform during the Women's Month and not being able to say, What is it that women in society must be able to hold leadership accountable for? Because they have to feed their children, being unemployed, retrenched, or short-timed as they are, without equal pay as they are. So we need a rising up of women in society who hold accountable themselves and those around them for the sake of rearing and generating a future that must still inherit a prosperous and a united South Africa.
Right. Okay. Dr. Lehohla.
Yes, I think there's been just too many gimmicks around. I mean, you can't call ministers. The president can't say, now I'm asking ministers to come together to look at corruption. They can't. They are beholden by their own partners. They are in there, they can't. It's a waste of time. Let the institutions that deal with these things. Just remember when Minister Mantaj, when he was chair of ANC, and when these issues of corruption were raised, he said, come here, come and report to me about corruption. At the end, he said, there is no evidence. What capacity does he have to deal with those kinds of things? You need an institution such as Zondo Commission, which is very good, but the downside of it is revealing so much that by the time Corona comes and the 70 billion from IMF comes, everybody is lining up and getting ready to have their share and their chance, their time to eat. Because the Zondo Commission says, oh, everybody has been eating. I have not been eating. That's my time to eat. And if you
and there's
don't
no consequences.
And when there are no consequences, and you have a person in the office of the president, I mean, the president should have fired the woman.
Yes, it has gotten to that level of the president's office.
For goodness sake, he handpicked that woman. Here are issues surrounding her. He should have been very absolutely correct and in his power to say, you leave this office. And he must declare that. That's not inhumane. It's just being just and fair.
Does that instill any kind of confidence? You know, when you hear the president not really taking action because it appears the spokesperson, it was her own initiative to say, I'm going to take leave of absence, having been implicated in this PPE scandal.
I think the president should have just set the record straight. This is what my administration has been. This is what has been the anchor of my administration: anti-corruption and ethical leadership. And you don't represent any of
that.
And check the comrade of the president. Now, in conclusion, I think what I wanted to say, it's a superior responsibility, which others may call consequence management. We've got to really tighten the belt. The responsibility between the political and the ethical is the responsibility to another and the love for social justice. We've got to really defend our democracy, and part of defending our democracy is calling corruption corruption. If it's happening, we shouldn't justify it and say my children, because I'm politically exposed, they shouldn't. It shows the level of laziness of some of our leaders, that they don't even understand the FICA regulations in the country. That as soon as you are politically exposed, it means that people, your spouse, your children, and stuff like that, some of those that are surrounding you should not have business. It's a clear conflict of interest. Now, we've got to really call them by what they are. Let's be, refine a conflict of interest, legislation in the country. But one of the things, let's be transparent. Even if it's emergency, procurement, it doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be transparent. Let everyone, let's enforce Section 217 of the Constitution, where you encourage transparency, competitive bidding, fairness, equity, and addressing imbalances of the past and all those that are in our Constitution. We can do that. It requires firm and thought leadership.
Well, thank you so much. I will have to leave it. There's so much to talk about. I know we could go on and on, but of course the conversation does not need to end here. You're at home. I can continue the conversation on social media platforms. Our Facebook page is live as we speak. Our social media platforms, Twitter handle at GUN_TV. You can also leave your comments there. Well, a huge thank you to the South African Association of Public Administration and Management that we're in association with to bring this program to us, and of course to our distinguished panel and their insights today. We'll have to leave it there for myself, Audrey Chimwanda Twala. Have a good night. More news and updates coming soon after this.